Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive is going to be pretty fascinating. We're going to be looking at duality and balance in natural systems. And this is a topic that you sent over a whole bunch of research on, so I'm very excited to dive into this with you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. There's a lot to unpack, but yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So maybe we could start with, I guess, like a basic definition of duality. Like,
Yeah.
how are we defining duality when we're talking about these natural systems?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Duality really refers to this idea that you have these two seemingly opposing forces that actually kind of work together to create harmony and equilibrium.
Okay, so it's not necessarily like one versus the other, but more like this interplay.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not about one force winning over the other. It's more about that dynamic interplay between them. And a classic example that kind of comes to mind is the yin and yang symbol.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this perfect visual representation of duality, right? You
Mm.
have darkness and light, you have passive and active, and they're all intertwined. Neither one can exist without the other.
Right. And even like within that darkness, there's like a seed of light and vice versa.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's really how it is in nature, right? We see this interplay of these opposing forces everywhere.
So what are some examples of where we see this like in the natural world? Like what are some like concrete examples of duality playing out?
Well, I mean, one of the most obvious examples is the relationship between predator and prey.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Right, on the surface, it seems like you have this very like competitive, almost adversarial relationship, but actually it's this very delicate balance that's essential for the health of an ecosystem.
So how does that work? How does like competition lead to balance?
Well, think about it this way. The predator relies on the prey for survival, right? But their presence also keeps the prey population in check, prevents them from overgrazing or depleting resources.
So it's almost like this like push and pull, this constant dance between these two forces that creates equilibrium.
Exactly. And without predators, prey populations could explode. And that could lead to all sorts of problems for the ecosystem as a whole.
It's almost like nature has its own like checks and balances.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this amazing self-regulating system that has evolved over millions of years. And you see it not just in predator-prey relationships, but in all sorts of natural phenomena.
Like what else? Where else do we see this duality?
Well, think about the day and night cycle.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, that's another classic example of duality, right? You have this rhythmic ebb and flow of light and darkness that governs so many biological processes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like I know I'm definitely a creature of habit when it comes to my sleep-wake cycle.
And so are most living organisms. Plants need sunlight for photosynthesis, but they also need darkness for respiration and other essential processes. It's this balance that allows them to thrive.
Right. And even us as humans, we have these like internal clocks called circadian rhythms that are really influenced by this day and night cycle.
Exactly. Those rhythms regulate everything from our sleep patterns to hormone production. Our bodies are essentially synchronized with the natural world, and when those rhythms get disrupted, it can have all sorts of negative consequences.
Yeah. I mean, you think about like jet lag. It's basically your body being out of sync with your environment.
Exactly, and that can lead to fatigue, digestive issues, all sorts of problems. So respecting these natural rhythms is really important for our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked about predator prey. We've talked about day and night. Are there other examples of this kind of duality and balance playing out in nature?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we could talk for hours about this. I mean, it really is everywhere you look. But I think one really fascinating example is the concept of homeostasis.
Okay, and homeostasis is?
So homeostasis is essentially the ability of organisms to maintain a stable internal environment despite external changes.
Okay, so like even though the world around us is constantly changing, our bodies are working to keep things balanced on the inside.
Exactly. And this is happening all the time without us even being aware of it. Our bodies are constantly monitoring things like temperature, blood sugar levels, pH balance, and making adjustments to keep everything within a healthy range.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Yeah.
Like what are the mechanisms involved in maintaining this balance?
Well, it's all about these intricate feedback loops. You can think of it like a thermostat in your house.
Okay, I think I can visualize that.
Yeah, so when the temperature in your house drops below a certain set point, the thermostat kicks in and turns on the heat to bring it back up. And our bodies work in a similar way. We have sensors throughout our bodies that are constantly monitoring these crucial variables.
So like if my body temperature starts to drop, my body will sense that and then take steps to warm me back up.
Exactly. And it works the other way around too. If you get too hot, your body will start sweating to cool you down. It's this constant fine-tuning that keeps everything running smoothly.
So our bodies are basically these incredible self-regulating machines.
They really are. And it's another testament to the power of duality and balance in nature. These opposing forces working together to create a stable and harmonious system.
It's really amazing when you think about it. All of this happening without us even having to think about it.
I know it's really quite remarkable, and it highlights just how intricate and interconnected the natural world really is.
This is already so fascinating, and we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I can't wait to dive deeper into some more specific examples of these principles at play in the natural world.
Me too. I think there's a lot more to explore here and a lot more to learn from these incredible balancing acts that nature performs every day. It's amazing how these ideas of duality and balance, they kind of pop up in all sorts of unexpected places in nature.
Oh, really?
Like where,
Well, have you ever heard of the Pareto principle?
yeah, the 80-20 rule, I've heard of it, but I mostly associate it with like business and productivity. Right. But it actually applies to natural systems as well.
Yeah.
In many cases, you find that roughly 80% of the effects come from just 20% of the causes.
Hmm, interesting. So give me an example of that in nature.
Okay, so let's say you're looking at a forest. You might find that a small number of tree species actually account for the vast majority of the biomass. Or in a grassland, a handful of plant species might be responsible for most of the primary production.
So it's not like everything is evenly distributed. It's more like a few key players have a disproportionate impact.
Exactly. And that's where those keystone species we were talking about earlier come in. The ones whose presence has a ripple effect far beyond their numbers. The proto principle highlights how important those species are for maintaining balance.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about sheer numbers. It's about the specific roles and interactions that really shape the overall dynamics.
Precisely. And this principle, it applies not only to the structure of ecosystems, but also to the flow of energy within them. So, for example, in a food web, you often see that a small number of top predators regulate the populations of many herbivores below them.
Right, which goes back to that predator-prey balance we were talking about.
Exactly. The presence of those top predators, even in small numbers, can have a cascading effect that helps to keep the whole system in check.
It's fascinating how these seemingly simple principles can have such profound effects.
It really is. And, speaking of simple principles that have a big impact, there's another one that I think is worth mentioning, Zipf's law.
Okay, Zipf's law, I'm not familiar with that one. What is it?
So Zipf's law, it describes a pattern where the frequency of an event is inversely proportional to its rank. So basically, the most common thing occurs way more often than the second most common thing, and so on.
Okay, that sounds a little abstract. Can you give me a concrete example?
Yeah. Sure, think about word usage in language. The most common word "the" appears far more frequently than the second most common word "a." And if you plotted this on a graph, you'd see this dramatic downward curve.
Ah, okay, I see. So there's a pattern to it. It's not just random.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this pattern shows up in all sorts of different contexts, not just language, but also things like city populations, the distribution of wealth, even the number of species in an ecosystem.
So how does this relate to the idea of balance in nature? It seems kind of counterintuitive that you would have a few things dominating while most others are less common.
Yeah, it might seem that way. But actually, Zipf's law suggests that this kind of unequal distribution might actually be important for maintaining diversity.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think about it. If everything was equally common, there would be a lot of competition for resources.
Yep.
And that could make it difficult for a wide variety of species to coexist.
Okay, yeah, I see your point. So
Yeah.
this hierarchy, this unequal distribution, it actually creates space and opportunity for a greater diversity of life.
Exactly. It's another example of how balance is maintained through these seemingly opposing forces, this interplay of dominance and diversity. It's really quite remarkable.
I'm starting to see these patterns everywhere now, and it makes me wonder, we've been talking a lot about these big picture concepts, ecosystems, and global patterns, but do these same principles apply at the individual level as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the most fundamental examples of duality and balance in nature is happening inside our own bodies all the time.
You're talking about homeostasis, right? That
Yeah.
ability of organisms to maintain a stable internal environment.
Exactly. Homeostasis is essential for life. It's what allows our bodies to function properly even when the world around us is constantly changing.
So how does it work? What are the mechanisms involved in maintaining this internal balance?
Well, it all comes down to those feedback loops we were talking about earlier. Remember the thermostat analogy?
Yeah, I remember.
So our bodies have these incredible sensors that are constantly monitoring things like temperature, blood sugar, pH levels, all sorts of variables. And if one of these variables strays too far from its set point, these sensors send a signal to the brain.
And then the brain takes action to correct it.
Precisely.
Mm.
So, for example, if your body temperature starts to rise, your brain will trigger your sweat glands to activate and cool you down. Or if your blood sugar drops too low, your brain will signal your liver to release stored glucose.
So it's this constant back and forth, this dance between opposing forces that keeps everything in equilibrium.
Exactly. And it's happening all the time without us even having to think about it. It's truly remarkable.
It really is. It's like our bodies are these incredible self-regulating machines.
They are, and it's a testament to the power of these simple yet profound principles of duality and balance that we see operating throughout the natural world, from the smallest cells to the largest ecosystems.
You know, it's really mind-blowing to think about how these seemingly simple principles like duality and balance are kind of at the heart of so much of what we see in nature.
It really is. Yeah, it speaks to the elegance and efficiency of the natural world.
And we've been talking a lot about these big picture ideas like ecosystems, species, interactions, even these global patterns. But I'm curious to bring it back down to the individual level.
Oh, you mean like how these principles are playing out within our own bodies?
Exactly. Like, how does this idea of duality and balance manifest in the way that our bodies function?
Well, one of the most striking examples is homeostasis, the ability to maintain a stable internal environment even when the external world is in flux.
Right. It's like our bodies are these finely tuned instruments constantly making adjustments to keep everything running smoothly. But how did that actually happen? Like, what are the mechanisms at play?
Well, it all boils down to these intricate feedback loops that we've been talking about. Remember the thermostat analogy?
Yeah, I remember.
So our bodies have these incredible sensors that are constantly monitoring all sorts of variables like temperature, blood sugar, pH levels,
Hmm.
you name it.
So it's like having an army of tiny internal monitors
Mm.
keeping tabs on everything.
Exactly. And if any of those variables start to stray too far from their set point, those sensors send a signal to the brain, which acts as a kind of control center.
Okay, so what happens then?
Well, the brain receives that signal and then triggers the appropriate response to bring things back into balance.
So, like, if my body temperature starts to rise, those sensors will send a message to the brain, and the brain will tell my sweat glands to kick into gear.
Precisely. And on the flip side, if your body temperature drops, your brain might tell your muscles to start shivering to generate heat.
Wow. It's amazing how much our bodies are doing behind the scenes without us even having to think about it.
It really is. It's a testament to the incredible complexity and efficiency of these systems.
But what happens when those systems break down? Like, what happens when those feedback loops get disrupted?
Well, that's when things can start to go wrong. If your body can't properly regulate blood sugar, you might develop diabetes. Or if your immune system overreacts, you might experience allergies or autoimmune disorders.
So these disruptions to homeostasis are really at the root of a lot of health problems.
They certainly can be. And it highlights the importance of understanding these systems and taking care of our bodies.
This whole conversation has really given me a new perspective. I'm starting to see the world and my own body as this incredible network of interconnected, balanced systems.
And that's a really powerful insight because once you start to see those connections, you start to appreciate the importance of maintaining that balance, not just for your own health, but for the health of the planet as well.
So it's like a call to action then. A reminder that we need to be mindful of our impact on these natural systems.
Exactly. Every choice we make, from the food we eat to the energy we consume, it all has ripple effects. And by understanding these principles of duality, balance, and interconnectedness, we can make more informed choices that contribute to a healthier and more sustainable future.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope this conversation has inspired you to keep exploring these ideas and to keep marveling at the incredible balancing act that is nature.
To all our listeners out there, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of duality and balance in natural systems. And we encourage you to keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning, and keep striving for balance in all aspects of your lives. Until next time,